Layoffs after layoffs after layoffs. Guys, listen, in light of all the layoffs that I've been seeing across the job market, it really has me reflecting back on when I was laid off from my job in 2018, a job that I committed 15 years of my life to. I learned some things from that experience, and I want to share some of those things with you today. So, one of the things I learned about jobs is that there's no such thing as job security. The reason why there's no such thing as job security is because there are unforeseen things that can disrupt a company's economic situation. Meaning, there are things that are out of your control that can affect your company's bottom line in a negative way. And as a result of some of those things, the impact can trickle down to the employees. Every time I hear people talk about job security, I'm always just shaking my head to myself. Once you go through a layoff, you see things through a different lens, right? I think the problem is so many people only look at jobs through the lens of an employee. And oftentimes we set certain expectations around jobs and work. We feel like jobs are supposed to be loyal to us. We feel like they're obligated to be loyal. And the reason why I know that's the case is because you can go on YouTube right now and listen to a variety of different people talk about how jobs don't care anything about you. They'll just lay you off at any given time. You're just another number. And I'm not here to debate whether or not those are true statements. I'm simply saying when I hear somebody says jobs don't care about you, that word care is critical because that word care implies emotion. That word care implies a feeling. And you have to separate your feelings when it comes to jobs because there's two sides of the spectrum. There's the side that oftentimes employees view a layoff, and then there's the business side of things. And that's the side of things that people don't like to talk about. The business aspect is what I think needs to be at the forefront of the conversation. Because at the end of the day, it's all business. The relationship between the employee and the employer is transactional. The job is paying you a salary to do the work. The job was never meant for you to be friends. Your employer is not your friend. You may have some friends that work within the same organization, but the job, the company, they're not your friend. And you shouldn't view them as such. When it comes to jobs, nothing surprises me. Getting laid off also taught me to always, always, always have an emergency fund. Always have money set aside for a rainy day. Don't get caught with your pants down. Don't get caught by surprise. And I think so many people, they get complacent, they get comfortable. They're spending every check that they get on frivolous things. They don't put money away. And then all of a sudden, there's a job loss. Or your hours are getting cut. No more overtime. So those are the things that I think about now after going through the situation that I went through back in 2018. Getting laid off from a job sucks because now you have to figure out, okay, what's your next move? You got to pivot. Fortunately for me, when I got laid off, I was offered a severance package. being with the company for 15 years, they actually offered me a similar pay structure that UPS is now offering some of their full-time drivers, right? That company offered me $1,000 for each year of service that I committed to the company. So in my case, I worked there 15 years. So I left there receiving $15,000, which was a decent lump sum of money, right? But when you think about the amount of time that I put in, it really wasn't a lot. And that's why I can relate to some of these UPS drivers now, how they feel like the amount that they're being offered is a slap in the face. Because when you look at it from the big picture, when you look at the grand scheme of things, it is a relatively small amount. At the end of the day, it's all about the bottom line. Definitely took me by surprise. We didn't see it coming. But fortunately for me, I was able to pivot. I was able to pursue a different career, right? I took half of my severance pay, paid for my trucking school out of pocket, got my Class A CDL, and the rest is history. Now I'm in a career. I have a job making the most money that I've ever made while working the job. And so it worked out for me. If you're not saving money, if you're not putting money away, if you don't have an emergency fund, you need to be building up your emergency fund. You have to understand that it's not necessarily that jobs don't care about you or you're just another number. When you have a business, you have to make some tough decisions. And sometimes those decisions mean letting go of some very good employees. But these are some things you have to do in order to trim the fat. These are some things you have to do in order to keep the business afloat and to sustain a certain level of profitability. Another thing that really kind of opened my eyes up is, when I was with that company and I was fortunate enough to get promoted into management, right? And this is another reason why I have a different level of appreciation for jobs, in a sense that I can't sit up here and be a hypocrite and say, well, the job don't care anything about you. When in fact, prior to me getting laid off from that 15-year career that I invested with that company, I had some pretty good years up until that point. I experienced a lot. I was able to go from a route delivery driver, get promoted to a route supervisor, and get promoted again to a sales manager operating my own shop. Guys, one thing I neglected to mention was that this job also allowed me to purchase my first home at 28 years old. So I definitely had some good moments. And I was exposed to the business side of things. I was exposed to the financials. So I got to see firsthand what it looks like in terms of operating costs to manage a shop, to manage a team of about 12 or 13 individuals, to see what budgets look like. Everything has a budget. You have a budget for payroll. You have a budget for vacations. You have a budget for, I had about 12 trucks in my fleet at the time. There's a maintenance budget. There's a fuel budget. You have a budget for just about everything. You have a budget for supplies, all these different things, right? And so you really get to see the business aspect. That's why I see things through a different lens. We would have conference calls, going over P&Ls, going over EBITDA, figuring out what the projections is going to be for the following year. And here's the thing, when it comes to budgets, you want to be up under, you want to be under budgets for most of your expenses. You want to be over budget when it comes to your sales budget, because obviously you want to try to exceed whatever your sales budget is, right? You want to be as profitable as possible. But when it comes to things like payroll, when it comes to things like repairs, you want to be under budget, right? You don't want to exceed those budgets. And so when you're a manager, you get to see all these different things. And so I'm going to give you guys a small example of how it's all about the bottom line, right? It's all about profit margins. When I took a job to relocate over to Mississippi to take over a shop, the company told me, it's like, look, Anthony, if you take this position, we're going to put it in the budget so that you can have an assistant, right? At the time, there was no assistant at this shop. So I'm like, all right, cool. That should help me out a lot, right? Because at the shop that I was leaving from, I was the assistant. I was the route supervisor. The person above me was the sales manager, right? But when I got promoted, okay, now I'm the sales manager at this new shop and I don't have an assistant. Well, the company decided to put that in my budget. So after about 5 or 6 months, they finally pulled the trigger. They added it to my budget and I was able to get me an assistant. My assistant happened to be one of my best route drivers at my previous location before I had moved over there to take over as the manager. He was always going above and beyond the call of duty. He was coming in anytime you called him on the off days. If we had to cover a route, he would come in. He was just a really good worker, man. He actually, he's a friend of mine as well, but he was a really good worker. So I told him, I'm like, look, when I get promoted to this particular position, I'm going to bring you along with me. And I kept my word. So when I left to go to Mississippi to take over that shop, they asked me if I had anybody in mind who I felt like had the qualities and the traits to be a route supervisor. And I'm like, yeah. And I mentioned his name, right? And there's like, I said, that's who I want as my assistant, as my route supervisor. So they okayed it. He came over there with me, basically. Like I said, I had left about 6 months before he did to get, acclimated to how that shop was looking and get acclimated with the drivers over there. Introduced, basically their new manager and things of that nature. But my assistant came over there, like I said, about 6 months later. Let me turn my AC on, man. It's probably going to get a little noisy. But, so, he comes over. I introduce him to the team or whatever. Everybody get acquainted. And after about maybe a year, my district manager comes to me and is like, Anthony, the sales have been pretty low, and it's getting to the point to where we're probably going to have to remove the budget for your assistant. There's just not a lot of growth opportunities over here that can justify you having an assistant. So what they did was they removed the budget for the sales or for the route supervisor, which meant I no longer had an assistant. He ended up getting demoted back to a driver. He ended up moving back to Florida, where we're both from. He went back to the location that we came from. Fortunately for him, they still kept his supervisor pay. So he lost in terms of position, right? He got demoted in terms of position, but they kept his pay the same. So he really was the highest paid route driver at the time. They didn't keep it like that. They ended up adjusting his pay down back to, a delivery driver pay. But they let him keep his route supervisor pay for about 3 to 6 months, I think it was. And he was happy to go back to Florida. He hated Mississippi. I did too. I'm just going to be fully transparent. Shout out to everybody. If you live in Mississippi, shout out to you guys. But it just wasn't a lot of growth opportunities in that market. So we had to cut costs. My bad. The camera got hot and just shut off on me. But I was just giving you a small example of how companies cut costs when the profits aren't there. So that particular shop, the sales wasn't there. There wasn't opportunities for growth. And so they had to make some changes. What did they do? Eliminate his position. freed up his salary, at least for that particular shop. Every shop has their own budget, right? So again, when he went back to his former shop, they had the budget to absorb his salary. So I mean, that's kind of how it works, man. Like I said, it's not personal at the end of the day. He understood it wasn't personal as well. He knew why they did it. They explained it, and that's just how it is, man. You may look at it and say, man, it sucks. Companies shouldn't do this, companies shouldn't do that. At the end of the day, it's all business. And when you view it from both sides of the spectrum, from the employee standpoint and also the business standpoint, you understand it. And for me, being a manager and just being exposed to the financials and understanding all the costs associated with operating a shop, that's just on the store level. We're not talking about company wide, but you really get to see the numbers and you understand that it's business. Everything that transpired, it happened for a reason. And without that happening, I wouldn't be where I am now. So that's how I look at it. Going forward, for me, like I said, when it comes to jobs, I just set realistic expectations. I look at jobs for what it is. So when I think about a job, I think about a job like this. I look at a job as an opportunity for me to make money in order to take care of my basic needs. What are my basic needs? Food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, and transportation. Those are the boxes that I need checked off when it comes to jobs and wherever I'm working. At this stage of my life, there's levels to it, right? So as a married man, I have responsibilities. And so for me, I need to be at a certain tier when it comes to the compensation. It wasn't like when I was 16 years old and I got my first job. I wasn't expecting that job to pay me a wage that can afford a mortgage or a rent, right? But at the age of 43, with a wife, I need to bring more to the table financially. Not just for my family, but for myself as well. Particularly somebody who has now obtained a skill. So I'm using that to the best of my ability in order to level up. And that's what I've done. And so if it ever comes to a time where I have to pivot and make another career change, then that's what I'm looking for. Listen, let me know what you think about everything that's going on in the job market. I'm curious to hear you guys' opinions. Drop it in the comment section. Until the next video, I'll catch y'all later. Peace.